I used to believe that if I tried hard enough, my family would finally see me. But sometimes, some eyes only look for mistakes to judge. My name is Colleen, the middle child in a family where love always came with conditions. Since I was little, I learned to stay quiet when my brother was praised and to smile when my sister got gifts. And me? Every effort I made was treated like it meant nothing. The family portrait hanging in our living room never had me at the center I was, just the shadow standing behind them. People say, home is where you belong. But for me, every time I walked through that door, it felt like my heart was being squeezed tighter. I stayed there smiling, nodding, pretending everything was fine, even though deep down, I knew they never really saw me. I used to think that if I worked harder and cared a little more, maybe they would finally see me. I never wanted praise, just a small acknowledgement, something like, "You did well, Colleen." But that sentence never came. Since I was 16, I'd gotten used to being the one who cleaned the table after every family dinner. My brother would leave to answer work calls, my sister would head upstairs to study, and my parents would chat about their big project. I'd bend down, collect the greasy plates, wipe the table clean, and whisper to myself, "It's okay. At least they're happy." When Grandpa got sick, I was the first to rush to the hospital. I stayed there for 3 months helping the nurses, cooking porridge, reading him the newspaper. My parents, they only came by on weekends, took a few pictures, and posted them online with the caption, "Thank God he's doing better." I felt a lump in my throat. I knew Grandpa only truly smiled when I sat beside him, but no one ever noticed. They said, "It's fine. Colleen has free time anyway." Free time? No. I was just trying to love them in the way I had never been loved. When my sister Sophie graduated, Mom asked me to decorate the backyard. I made every wreath by hand, blew up every balloon, stayed up until midnight to make it perfect. The next day, everyone admired how beautiful it looked. But then I heard Dad say, "Good thing your mom hired a service. Colleen could never make it look this nice." I was standing right behind them, holding a glass of water that trembled in my hand. I didn't say a word. I smiled, pretending I hadn't heard. Because in this family, whatever I felt never really mattered. When my brother Ethan started his business, I helped him edit his documents and write the copy for his website. I wasn't a tech person, but I had a gift for writing. Ethan used my words to impress his first investor. When he got funded, he threw a small party. Everyone congratulated him, and my parents proudly said, "You're so talented." And me? I sat quietly in the corner, raising my glass to him. No one raised theirs back. No thank you. I was just the quiet shadow standing beside someone else's success. Years later, I started writing stories. That was the only place I could truly speak my heart. In my stories, I created people who knew how to love, who saw each other's worth, something I'd always longed for in real life. When I handed my first draft to Mom, she skimmed a few pages and said, "You should find something more practical, honey. Writing doesn't feed anyone." I folded the pages and tucked them away in my drawer. That night, I cried not because she criticized me, but because I had hoped she'd read to the last line, the one where I dedicated the story to her. Still, I kept trying. On every holiday, I prepared gifts for everyone. A tie for Dad, perfume for Mom, a jacket for Ethan, a notebook for Sophie. They smiled politely and set the gifts aside, but I was still happy thinking maybe someday they'd see my heart. Then one night at dinner, I heard Mom say, "Colleen's nice, but she doesn't really have any direction, always busy with little things." I forced a smile and passed some vegetables to Dad, pretending the words didn't hurt, but they did deeply. I kept wondering why my love always seemed to mean so little. Maybe it was because I wasn't impressive enough. I didn't make as much money as my brother, didn't attend a top school like my sister, didn't speak with confidence like my mother. I just listened, cared, and did small things that, to them, never really mattered. One snowy winter night, Grandpa called me to his bedside. He held my hand and whispered, "Sweetheart, don't think you're not good enough. They just haven't learned how to see you yet." I squeezed his hand tight. Maybe he was the only one who truly understood me. When he passed away, I was the only one by his side. But in the obituary, They only listed my parents and their children, no mention of the granddaughter who had cared for him all that time. That was when I realized my efforts had never been seen, and maybe they never would be. But the scariest part wasn't being ignored. It was when I started believing I truly wasn't worth loving. I still lived in that house, still smiled, still did everything to please them. But inside, I was slowly dying. I no longer hoped for praise or pride. I only wished that someday, someone would look at me not as the nice girl with too much free time, but as someone who truly mattered. I don't know when that day will come. I only know that every time they ask, "Colleen, can you help with this?" I nod. Because I'm afraid that if I say no, they'll have no reason left to keep me around. But deep down, I also know this: a person can only be loved when they finally stop begging for love. And maybe it's time I learn how to do that. I've always loved Thanksgiving, not because of the turkey or the pumpkin pie, but because it was one of the few days my whole family sat together. I always believed that maybe, just maybe one year, things would be different, that they'd finally say, "Colleen, you did well." This year, I came home with two pieces of good news. I'd just signed a publishing contract for my debut novel, and I was engaged to Justin, the man who believed in me even when I doubted myself. He once told me, "You don't need to prove anything. You deserve love simply for being you." Quote. I smiled when he said that, but deep down, I still wanted to prove it, not just to him, but to my family too. That morning, I woke up early and chose a simple cream dress, elegant, but not too showy. On the drive home, I imagined my mother's face when she heard my news. Maybe this time she'd be proud. Maybe Dad would smile. Maybe Sophie and Ethan would finally see me differently. The familiar brown wooden door opened to the scent of cinnamon and roasted meat. Mom was, as always, directing everyone in the kitchen. She looked up, glanced at me from head to toe, and said, "Oh, Colleen, you're here. Put your bag over there, I'm busy." No hug, no smile, no, "How have you been?" Just a quick line, as if my presence hardly mattered. Dad stepped out of the living room, glass of wine in hand. "Well, look who it is. Still writing those little stories of yours?" I smiled. "Yes, Dad. I just signed a contract with a publisher. My first book will be out early next year." He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Huh. Well, good. Let's hope you didn't have to pay to print it yourself this time." My throat tightened. "No, they paid me in advance." "Ah," he said flatly. "Good. If it makes you happy, that's what matters." Dinner went on as usual, the long table, soft candlelight, the clinking of silverware. Sophie showed photos from her trip to Italy with her new boyfriend. Ethan bragged about his company opening a second branch. Mom and Dad nodded proudly, laughing loud enough to fill the room. I sat there in silence, waiting for someone to ask about me. No one did. When dessert was served, I finally gathered the courage to speak. "I have something to share." The table went quiet. I took a breath and smiled. "I'm engaged. Justin and I are planning a small wedding in the spring. I'd love for you all to come." For a moment, there was silence. Then Mom set her fork down. Her expression flickered with surprise before twisting into a half smile. "Oh, really? That's quick. How long have you two been together?" "Over 2 years," I said softly. You know, marriage isn't as simple as writing stories." Her tone was so cold it stung. Ethan chuckled. "Better make sure Justin knows you still don't have a real job." Quote. Sophie added, "If you get married, who's going to help Mom cook Thanksgiving next year?" Laughter erupted around the table. I forced a smile, but my throat burned. "I really did sign a real publishing deal," I whispered. "My first book comes out in February." Sophie shrugged. "Congrats, I guess. But you know, books like that, not many people actually buy them." Dad joined in. "Writing's a fine hobby, but you should find something more stable. You're too old to be dreaming like this." Kind. I looked around. No one noticed the tears welling in my eyes. They just kept talking, laughing, as if I wasn't even there. A chill ran down my spine. I heard their laughter, their glasses clinking together, and I knew they would never change. I quietly stood up. "Excuse me for a moment," I said softly. Mom frowned. "Where are you going? You haven't even tried the pumpkin pie I made." "It's okay, Mom. I'm full," I replied with a faint smile. I stepped outside. The The cold air bit into my skin. Snow began to fall, light and slow. Inside, their laughter echoed, but no one noticed I'd left. I stood on the porch, watching them through the window, my family, framed in warm light. They looked so perfect, like a scene from a movie. But I knew the truth. I could love them all I wanted, but I could never make them love me back. My phone buzzed a text from Justin. "Everything okay, my love?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm okay. I just need to go home." For the first time in years, I understood home isn't where you were born. It's where someone truly listens to you. And that Thanksgiving night, the one I thought would finally change everything, was the moment I realized it was time to leave. I was going to leave right after dinner, but just as I grabbed my coat, my mother called out, "Colleen, where are you going? At least have a slice of my pie." Her voice was gentle, but underneath it was that familiar note of control. I turned around and forced a smile. "Okay, Mom, just a little." I sat back down. The cold from outside still lingered in my hair. The family had already moved on to another topic. Sophie was talking about buying a house with her boyfriend, and everyone seemed thrilled. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie," Dad said, raising his glass. "I know you'll do great things." "My wonderful girl," Mom added, laughing. "You've always had direction, not like some people who just chase silly dreams." I knew who some people meant. I took a bite of pie, the sweetness of the pumpkin choking in my throat. Ethan turned to me, smirking. "Still writing those sappy love stories?" "Mom says that stuff's not realistic." "I'm still writing," I said quietly. "And people do read them." People read them?" Sophie giggled. "You talk like you're famous. Do you know how many people out there are trying and failing? Don't kid yourself, Colleen." The table erupted in laughter. My hand trembled as I set down my spoon. "I'm not kidding myself. I'm just doing what I love." Dad shook his head. "Love doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart." I looked at him, voice trembling. "I never asked anyone to pay my bills for me, Dad." The room went silent, heavy, tense. Mom's eyes hardened. "Watch your tone, young lady. We're just trying to help you be stable, and you respond like this?" I drew in a deep breath. "I'm not being rude. I'm just tired. Tired of always being seen as the useless one." Ethan chuckled, setting his glass down slowly. "Colleen, don't be so dramatic. Everyone knows you're just sensitive." Sophie chimed in. "Yeah, you always act like the world's against you." The air grew thick. Every word they said felt like another needle pressing into my chest. Years of quiet endurance, of swallowing pain, all pressed down at once. "Do any of you ever think about how hard I've tried?" My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Mom raised an eyebrow. "Tried? You do a few chores and think you've sacrificed your life for us?" I stood up, the chair screeching against the floor. "Not a few chores, Mom. I stayed with Grandpa for 3 months when no one else would. I wrote Ethan's investor pitch when he had no one to help. I planned Sophie's birthday down to every detail. I've done everything, but not once has anyone said thank you." No one spoke. Their faces stiffened, as if they couldn't believe the words came from me. Dad rose, his voice low but firm. "Colleen, that's no way to talk to your parents." I met his eyes. "I've respected everyone here my whole life, and what did I get in return? Silence, criticism, mockery. I'm done." Sophie shot up, hands on the table. "So what? You think you're the victim now? No one asked you to do those things." "You're right," I said quietly. "No one asked. But tell me who else would have done them if I hadn't." The only sound left was the faint crackle of the candles. My heart pounded so loud it hurt. Mom crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "You are so ungrateful, Colleen. This family raised you, fed you, gave you everything, and you stand here listing favors? If you don't like it here, then leave. Don't cause a scene in my house." I laughed a bitter, broken laugh that didn't even sound like me. "You're right, Mom. I should leave. Because this place was never really my home." I turned, reaching for my coat. "Colleen," Dad called out. "Don't be impulsive." Tears rolled down my face, but my voice was steady. "This isn't impulsive, Dad. It's the first time in my life I've chosen myself. Sophie Muttert. You'll regret this." I met her Chaze. "No, Sophie. The only thing I regret is waiting this long to walk away." I stepped outside. The wind slapped my face, cold and sharp, but inside I felt lighter than ever. Behind me, the door slammed shut. Mom's voice echoed through it. You're a disgrace to this family. I turned to look at the glowing house, the place I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to. Now, all I saw was an empty shell filled with voices that never really heard me. I walked to my car, my hands trembling as I started the engine. A single tear fell, but not from pain this time. It was from relief, because I knew I had just done the bravest thing in my life. On the seat beside me, my phone lit up. A message from Justin. I'm waiting at home. Are you okay? I looked out at the snow-covered road, took a deep breath, and typed back. I'm okay. I'm coming home. For the first time, home didn't mean the place that hurt me. It meant the place where I could finally be myself. ChatGPT.noi. I don't remember how long I drove that night. Snow covered the road, and the headlights shone on the white patches that looked like smoke. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt empty, as if I had finally set down a heavy burden that had followed me my whole life. When I stopped in front of Kristen's small apartment, it was almost midnight. My best friend opened the door right after I knocked. She didn't ask, didn't speak, she just hugged me tightly. And that was when the tears finally broke free. I cried like a child, standing in her small kitchen filled with the smell of cocoa and warm wood. Kristen stroked my hair, her voice soft as a breeze. You don't have to explain anything. I know. She had always been that kind of person, never forcing, never judging, just quietly there, enough for me to feel seen. We sat on the couch, and I told her everything. The dinner, the words, the looks, the feeling of walking out of that house. I talked nonstop, and Kristen just listened. When I finally stopped, she sighed and said, Colleen, you've endured them for too long. I looked at her, eyes red. But they're my family, Kristen. I can't hate them. No one's asking you to hate them, she said gently. But you have the right not to let them hurt you anymore. Love doesn't mean you have to suffer. Quote. That sentence kept me silent for a long time. Yes, I still loved them, but that love couldn't fix the wounds that kept reopening year after year. I had spent my whole life trying to be accepted and forgot that I could accept myself instead. The next morning, Kristen made me a cup of hot coffee and said, You've got two choices, Colleen. Either keep trying to prove your worth to them, or start living like you already know you're worthy. I smiled weakly. You always say things that wake me up. Because I see what they don't, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You don't need anyone's permission to be yourself. In the days that followed, I stayed at Kristen's apartment. In the mornings, we walked together in the snow-covered park. At night, I wrote. She often sat beside me, reading my drafts, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. I love this character, she said once. She's fragile but brave, just like you. I smiled. She is me. That night, as I watched my manuscript grow thicker page by page, I realized I was rewriting my own life. No longer stories begging for love or approval, but a journey to rediscover my worth. One morning, I got a call from my mother. The screen lit up, and my heart tightened. Kristen looked at me and nodded. You don't have to answer if you're not ready. I turned off the ringer, not out of anger, but because this time, I chose peace over obligation. The next day, I received a message from Justin. I heard you left home. Are you okay? I replied, I'm okay. For the first time in years, I really am. He came that afternoon. When I opened the door, he just looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you, he said, not because of the book, but because you stood up for yourself. Those words made me cry again, but this time, from relief. I no longer felt small or invisible. Weeks later, I signed the official publishing contract. They asked me to write a short introduction for the book cover. I spent hours writing and erasing, until I stopped at one simple line. For those who've ever felt not enough, you always were. They just didn't see it. When the first printed copy arrived, my hands trembled as I opened it. On the first page, I wrote, For Grandpa, the first person who believed I could, and for Kristen, the one who made me believe I deserved to. That night, we opened a bottle of wine to celebrate. Kristen raised her glass and said, To Colleen, the girl who finally chose herself. I smiled, clinking glasses softly, and to everyone brave enough to walk away from what hurts them. At that moment, I knew I had begun a new life. A life no longer chasing validation, but seeking peace. A few days later, I wrote an email to my mother. It wasn't long, just a few lines. I'm not angry, and I'm not bitter. I just need some distance to find peace. When you're truly ready to listen, I'll be here. I hit send, then closed my laptop. Outside, the snow had melted, and sunlight poured through the window. I took a deep breath, my chest felt light. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being alone, because in that silence, I had finally found what I'd been searching for, all along: peace, self-respect, and myself. Chat GPT, Darnoy. Many years have passed since that fateful night when I left my parents' home. My life now is full of the things I once dreamed of. A successful writing career, lasting love with Justin, steadfast support from Kristen and Grandpa. Yet the past, like an undercurrent, still occasionally surfaces, reminding me that some pieces of life can never be completely forgotten. One autumn afternoon, as I was organizing manuscripts for my next book, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it as usual, but intuition told me to check. On the screen was a message from my mother. "Colleen, we want to meet you. We've changed." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to close the door immediately, but another part, curious, or perhaps instinctively wanting to close a long unfinished chapter, urged me to reply. I took a deep breath and typed, "Meet in a public place. One time only." We chose a small cafe in the city center. When I walked in, they were already there. My mother, father, sister, and even my brother. They looked at me with solemn expressions, as if afraid of something. I sat down, keeping a distance, my eyes cold but controlled. Mother began, her voice trembling. "Colleen, we want to apologize. We didn't see you. We didn't acknowledge all you've done." My sister interjected, her breath quick. "Colleen, I truly regret hurting you. I was wrong." Father nodded silently, and my brother kept his eyes on the table, silent, but shame flickering in his gaze. I sat there listening. Emotions swirled. I still felt some anger, some pain, but another part, more mature, more peaceful, arose. I was no longer the trembling, invalidated girl I once was. I drew a deep breath. "I do not dismiss your apologies, but I want you to understand I've lived with this pain for decades. I've learned to stand on my own without needing your recognition." Mother cried. My sister took my hand, trembling. We've only just realized how selfish we were. We want to start over if you allow us." I looked at them, my gaze gentle but steady. This was no longer the moment for blame or argument. This was the moment to choose. I smiled, my voice softening. "I forgive you, but forgiveness does not mean going back to the way things were. I have built my own life, and I will not let anyone destroy this peace." Quote. In that moment, I felt a strange surge of energy. Forgiveness did not make me weak. On the contrary, I felt freer, lighter. I did not need them to completely change to feel at peace. I only needed to step forward without carrying the burden of resentment. We sat and spoke quietly. Mother spoke of the days she realized she had been too strict. Father admitted he had focused too much on my siblings' achievements and overlooked me. My sister apologized for cruel words, and my brother shared that he had felt guilty for not standing up for me. I listened without interruption, without sharpness. The past could not be changed, but I could change how I viewed it. I said, "We cannot live in the past. I have found a new family: Justin, Kristen, Grandpa. They have taught me the value of love and true care. I hope you will learn to love and appreciate each other as well." Distance remained, but this time it was no longer a wound. It was a boundary, a healthy line between me and those who once hurt me. I smiled as I left the cafe that day, feeling at ease. They had expressed remorse, and I had forgiven enough to move forward without dragging along old pain. Back at my apartment, I sat by the window, watching the city lights come on. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of dry leaves and distant memories. I understood that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means accepting that the past is a part of you, but it does not control you. I picked up my pen and wrote the first line of my new book. Forgiveness is not returning, it is moving forward with a free spirit. Justin stepped in, holding my hand. "Are you okay?" "Perfectly," I replied, smiling with full confidence. "For the first time, I truly feel free." You Grandpa knocked at the door, carrying the croissant I love. I heard you met your old family. You did the right thing, dear. Forgiving without destroying yourself is the strongest thing you can do. I sat among them, warmth filling me. My new family, those who truly saw me, loved me for who I am, were right there. The past was still there, but now it was just a story I could tell, no longer a shackle. I knew life was long, and each day is an opportunity to build love, freedom, and happiness. And for the first time, I stepped into the future without fear.